The scorching desert sun beat down on Eliza Morgan's weathered wooden porch as she rocked silently in her chair, eyes fixed on the distant horizon where her husband had disappeared 18 months ago, never to return. Rock Springs, Wyoming Territory, 1876, a place that had once held promise but now felt as empty as the grave she dug with her own hands when the search parties finally brought Thomas home. Dust swirled across the yard of her modest ranch outside town, the same dust that had settled over her heart. At 32, Eliza had resigned herself to a life of solitude, the wedding band on her finger now feeling like a shackle to memories too painful to bear. The small ranch Thomas had built with such hope was slowly falling into disrepair around her, much like her will to continue. "Ma," called 8-year-old James from inside the house. "The roof's leaking again." Eliza closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath before rising from her chair. One more problem, one more burden she couldn't possibly shoulder alone. Thomas had been gone since that terrible winter of '74, leaving her with their son, a struggling cattle ranch, and debts that mounted with each passing season. Inside, James was standing on a chair, holding a metal pot beneath a steady drip coming from the ceiling. His small face was pinched with concentration, his eyes so like his father's, determined to help. "Good thinking," Eliza said, managing a weak smile as she ruffled his sandy hair. "But we'll need more than pots if these spring storms keep up. Mr. Wilson at the Mercantile says we need to fix it proper before the big rains come next month," James said, repeating what he'd overheard in town. Eliza nodded, knowing full well what the townspeople were saying. Poor Morgan widow. Shame about her place falling apart. Someone ought to help that woman before she loses everything. "We'll manage," she told her son with more conviction than she felt. "We always do." Later that afternoon, as Eliza was tending to their small vegetable garden, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her straighten, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle she kept propped against the fence post. Visitors were rare out this way, and rarely brought good news. A man on horseback appeared, riding a chestnut stallion. He slowed as he approached, and Eliza could make out his lean, tall figure against the setting sun. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but something in the way he sat his horse, confident but not arrogant, made her lower the rifle slightly. "Evening, madam," he called, stopping a respectful distance away. "Name's Blake Rutherford, new farrier in Rock Springs. Sheriff Jenkins mentioned you might have horses needing attention." Eliza's grip tightened on her rifle. "Sheriff Jenkins ought to mind his own business," she replied sharply. The man Blake removed his hat, revealing a shock of dark hair and features weathered by sun and wind. He wasn't young, perhaps mid-30s, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested as much laughter as hardship in his past. "He mentioned you might say that too," Blake said with a slight smile that didn't overstep into presumption. "But I've just set up shop and I'm looking for work." "Your neighbors mentioned you have good stock." "Had good stock," Eliza corrected. "We're down to 2 horses now and I can't afford a farrier." Blake nodded, replacing his hat. "I understand times are hard, Mrs. Morgan, but I'm not opposed to bartering. Perhaps there's something we could arrange that doesn't involve money changing hands." There was something sincere in his tone that caught Eliza off guard. For a fleeting moment, she thought of the leaking roof, the broken corral fence, the well pump that worked only half the time. But pride quickly reasserted itself. "We're managing just fine," she said firmly. Blake Rutherford studied her for a moment, his gray eyes taking in the sagging roof, the untended fences. But there was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet understanding that made something twist painfully in Eliza's chest. "I respect that," he said finally. "But if you change your mind, I'm staying at the boarding house in town. For what it's worth, Mrs. Morgan, there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered freely." As he turned his horse to leave, James came running from behind the house, excitement on his face at the sight of a visitor. "Are you here to fix the roof, mister?" he called out. Blake turned in his saddle, looking from the boy to Eliza. "Not today, son," he answered kindly, "but perhaps another time." Eliza watched him ride away, annoyed at the flicker of disappointment she felt. She'd gotten along just fine these past 18 months without handsome strangers offering help. She'd continue to do so. "Why didn't you let him help, Ma?" James asked, looking up at her with confusion in his young eyes. "Because we don't need charity," she answered, turning back toward the house. "Morgans take care of themselves." That night, as rain pattered against the roof, finding new places to leak through, with each passing hour Eliza lay awake, emptying and replacing pots as water dripped steadily onto her bedroom floor. Perhaps stubbornness wasn't worth pneumonia, she thought bitterly. Morning brought clear skies, but a new problem. Their remaining milk cow had somehow pushed through the weakened fence and wandered off. Eliza spent hours searching the surrounding countryside, returning home exhausted and empty-handed. The cow represented their most reliable food source. Losing her was a devastating blow. "We'll find her tomorrow," she promised James, though hope was threadbare in her voice. The next day brought no better luck. By afternoon, Eliza was forced to admit defeat and head into town for supplies they now desperately needed. Rock Springs was busy with the usual Saturday traffic, miners from the nearby coal operations, mixing with ranchers and townspeople. The mercantile was crowded when Eliza entered, James trailing behind her. She kept her eyes downcast, knowing the pitying looks that would follow her. The widow Morgan, too proud to ask for help, too broken to start again. "Mrs. Morgan," Mr. Wilson greeted her from behind the counter. "What can I get for you today?" Eliza handed him a carefully written list. "Just the essentials, please." As Wilson gathered her items, the bell above the door jingled. Eliza didn't turn, but James tugged at her skirt. "Ma, it's the horseman," he whispered. Blake Rutherford stood in the doorway, removing his hat as he entered. He nodded politely to those around him before his gaze settled on Eliza. Recognition and something else, concern, flickered across his features. "Mrs. Morgan," he greeted, approaching with measured steps. "I hope today finds you well." "Well enough," she replied stiffly, "though our milk cow's gone missing." She hadn't meant to share this information, it had simply slipped out, perhaps because of exhaustion or the genuine interest in his expression. "Jersey cow." "Brown with a white patch on her flank?" Blake asked. Eliza's heart quickened. "Yes, have you seen her? Found her wandering near the creek yesterday evening. She's at Simmons' place now. I was planning to ask around town to find the owner." Relief washed over Eliza. "She's our last milk cow." "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Rutherford." "Blake," he corrected gently. "And there's no need for thanks. I'd be happy to bring her back to your place this afternoon if that suits." Eliza hesitated, torn between practical need and the walls she'd built around herself. "That would be appreciated," she finally managed. The smile that crossed Blake's face was warm but restrained, as if he understood the effort it had taken her to accept this small assistance. "I'll be by after I finish my business in town," he promised. True to his word, Blake appeared at the Morgan ranch that afternoon, leading Eliza's cow on a rope. James ran out to greet them both, his excitement palpable as he patted the cow's familiar flank. "Thank you for bringing her back, Mr. Rutherford," Eliza said, standing on the porch. "Please call me Blake," he said again. "And it was no trouble, though I noticed her hooves could use some attention. Would you allow me to tend to them while I'm here? No charge, consider it a welcome gift to my new community." Eliza felt the familiar resistance rising within her, but James was looking up at her with hopeful eyes. "I suppose that would be acceptable," she conceded. Blake set to work with quiet efficiency, demonstrating a gentle way with animals that impressed even Eliza's critical eye. As he worked, he spoke casually about the town, his decision to settle in Rock Springs after years of traveling the Western Territories. "War took me all over," he explained, examining the cow's back hoof. "After Appomattox, I couldn't seem to stay in one place. Picked up farrier work from an old cavalry sergeant in Montana Territory." "Which side?" Eliza asked before she could stop herself. "Union," he answered simply. "Though I've found that out here, what matters more is who a man is now, not which uniform he might have worn." Eliza nodded, thinking of her late husband who'd fought for the Confederacy despite being from Pennsylvania originally. The war had left its mark on Thomas in ways that only she had fully understood. "Your roof's in bad shape," Blake observed as he finished with the cow, glancing up at the damaged shingles. "We're aware," Eliza said, her voice cooling. Blake seemed to sense her withdrawal. "I didn't mean to overstep, Mrs. Morgan. It's just that I'm handy with more than horses. Before the war, I was a carpenter's apprentice." "Mr. Rutherford Blake," he corrected again, a hint of stubbornness in his tone that matched her own. "Blake," she amended. "I appreciate your concern, but we can manage our own affairs." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. But my offer stands. Should you reconsider? Not charity, Mrs. Morgan, just neighbors helping neighbors. It's how folks survive out here." After he'd gone, James looked up at his mother with accusation in his young eyes. "He was just trying to help, Ma. Pa always said to accept help graciously when it's needed." The mention of Thomas's philosophy struck Eliza like a physical blow. Her husband had indeed believed in the strength of community, something she'd lost sight of in her grief. That night, as another spring storm rolled through, and water dripped steadily into their bedroom, Eliza made a decision that cost her pride dearly. The next morning, she hitched their wagon and drove into town with James, stopping outside the modest building that housed Blake's new farrier shop. The man himself was in the yard, working at his forge, sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. He looked up in surprise as their wagon approached. "Mrs. Morgan," he greeted, setting down his tools. "Is everything all right?" Eliza swallowed hard. "Our roof won't make it through another storm," she said plainly. "I understand you have carpentry skills. I can pay with eggs, milk, and some of our garden produce when it comes in." Blake wiped his hands on a rag, considering her offer. "That's more than fair," he said finally. "When would you like me to start? Is tomorrow too soon?" The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. "Tomorrow is perfect," Blake replied with a smile that somehow didn't feel like victory. "I'll bring my tools." The next morning, Blake arrived early, wagon loaded with tools and supplies. He worked methodically through the day, removing damaged shingles and replacing rotted supports. Eliza brought him water and a midday meal, watching with grudging admiration as he transformed their failing roof with skilled hands. By the week's end, the roof was sound, but Blake had identified other critical repairs needed around the property: the sagging porch, the unreliable well pump, the broken corral fencing. Each morning, he would arrive with materials, often salvaged or traded for, explaining patiently what needed to be done and why. "You don't have to do all this," Eliza told him one evening as he was preparing to leave. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. "I know," Blake replied simply, "but I want to." "Why?" The question had been building in her for days. Blake was quiet for a long moment. "I've been where you are," he finally said. "After the war, I lost my wife to fever, had to sell our farm in Ohio because I couldn't bear to stay. Spent years drifting, keeping everyone at arm's length." He looked at her directly. "It's no way to live, Mrs. Morgan." Eliza felt something crack inside her chest, a hairline fracture in the wall she'd built around her grief. "Eliza," she said softly. "If I'm to call you Blake, you should call me Eliza." His smile in response was gentle. "Good night, Eliza. I'll see you tomorrow." As spring progressed into early summer, Blake's presence at the Morgan Ranch became a comfortable routine. James adored him, soaking up the male attention he'd been missing since his father's death. Eliza found herself looking forward to the sound of Blake's wagon in the morning, the easy conversation that had gradually developed between them. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the vegetable garden, Blake, having insisted on helping after completing his other tasks, Eliza found herself sharing stories about Thomas, memories she'd kept locked away since his passing. "He could never remember to close the chicken coop at night," she said with a small laugh. "We lost so many birds that first year to foxes, I threatened to make him sleep out there to guard them." Blake chuckled. "Sounds like a good man who wasn't much of a farmer." "He wasn't," Eliza agreed. "He was a schoolteacher back east, came west for adventure and my father's land. Farming never sat right with him, but he tried so hard." "For you," Blake observed. Eliza nodded, surprising herself by adding, "He would have liked you." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. As June brought warmer weather, Blake invited Eliza and James to a town social being held at the newly built schoolhouse. "The whole community will be there," he explained. "Music, food, dancing. It would do you both good to join in." Eliza hesitated. She hadn't attended a social event since before Thomas's death, preferring the solitude of her grief to the curious glances and well-meaning but painful condolences of neighbors. "I don't think," she began. "Please, Ma," James interrupted. "I want to go. Miss Henderson said there'll be games for the children and pie." Looking at her son's hopeful face, Eliza realized how much she'd denied him in her own withdrawal from the world. "All right," she conceded. "We'll go, but only for a little while." The night of the social, Eliza stood before her small mirror, studying her reflection with critical eyes. She'd unearthed a dress she hadn't worn in years, a simple blue cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar. Her auburn hair, usually severely pinned back, she'd arranged more softly around her face. "You look pretty, Ma," James said from the doorway, already dressed in his Sunday best. "Thank you, sweetheart," she replied, suddenly nervous in a way that had nothing to do with facing the townspeople and everything to do with the man who would be escorting them. Blake arrived punctually, his wagon freshly cleaned. He himself was dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark vest, his usually unruly hair combed neatly back. When Eliza emerged from the house, his appreciative gaze made her cheeks warm in a way they hadn't in years. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. The schoolhouse was transformed for the occasion, lanterns hanging from the porch and strung between trees in the yard. A small band played lively tunes while children darted between groups of chatting adults. James quickly spotted friends and ran off to join them after extracting a promise from Blake to save him some pie. Eliza tensed as they approached the gathering, but she was surprised by the warm welcomes that greeted her. There was curiosity about Blake's presence at her side, certainly, but no judgment in the eyes of her neighbors, only genuine pleasure at seeing her rejoin community life. "I've missed seeing you at these gatherings, Eliza," said Martha Jenkins, the sheriff's wife. It does my heart good to see you here tonight." As the evening progressed, Eliza found herself relaxing, enjoying conversations and even laughing at Sheriff Jenkins' exaggerated tales of his younger days. When the band struck up a waltz, Blake turned to her with a questioning look. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, his voice carrying an undertone of uncertainty she'd never heard from him before. Eliza hesitated, her hand unconsciously touching her wedding ring. "I haven't danced since, I understand," Blake said quickly. "Perhaps another time." But as he began to turn away, Eliza made a decision. Reaching out, she touched his arm. "I'd like to dance," she said softly. "I'm just a bit rusty." Blake's smile was worth the momentary discomfort. "That makes two of us," he confessed. His hand at her waist was respectful, his lead gentle as they moved among the other couples. Eliza was acutely aware of his presence, the clean scent of soap, the strength in his shoulder beneath her hand, the careful way he guided her through the steps. "I never properly thanked you," she said as they danced, "for everything you've done for us." "You've thanked me plenty," he replied. "With food, conversation, and allowing me into your lives. That's worth more than you know." Something in his tone made Eliza look up, meeting his gaze directly. What she saw there, admiration, affection, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name, caused her breath to catch. "Blake, she began, but was interrupted by a commotion near the refreshment table. A group of miners, clearly having imbibed too freely from flasks outside, were becoming rowdy. Sheriff Jenkins moved quickly to intervene, but not before one miner knocked into another, sending him stumbling into the table where James and other children were serving themselves pie. The table overturned with a crash, children screaming as food and punch splashed everywhere. Blake immediately released Eliza and rushed toward the chaos, reaching James just as the boy was knocked to the ground by fleeing children. "James!" Eliza cried, pushing through the crowd. Blake had already lifted the boy, checking him for injuries. "He's all right," he assured her. Just startled and wearing more blackberry pie than he got to eat, James, despite being shaken and sticky with dessert, managed a wobbly smile. "I'm okay, Ma. Mr. Blake caught me." The incident effectively ended the social for the Morgans. Blake helped clean James up as best they could before escorting them home. The ride back was quiet, James falling asleep against Blake's side despite the excitement. "He's becoming quite attached to you," Eliza observed softly as Blake carried the sleeping boy into the house and laid him gently on his bed. "The feeling is mutual," Blake replied, watching as Eliza removed James's shoes. "He's a fine boy. You've done well with him, Eliza." In the main room, with James safely tucked in, an awkward silence fell between them. The intimacy of their dance lingered in the air, complicated by the evening's abrupt end. "Would you like some coffee?" Eliza offered, suddenly unwilling for Blake to leave. "I'd like that," he answered, the relief in his voice matching her own. They sat at her small kitchen table, steam rising from their cups as they talked about the social, the repairs still needed on the ranch, the upcoming Independence Day celebrations in town. Normal conversation, yet charged with an undercurrent that neither acknowledged directly. Finally, Blake set down his cup. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's late." Eliza nodded, walking him to the door. On the porch, bathed in moonlight, Blake turned to her. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said. "It meant a great deal to me to have you there." "I enjoyed it more than I expected to," she admitted. Blake hesitated, then reached for her hand, holding it gently between his own. "Eliza, I want to be clear about something. I didn't help you and James out of pity or just neighborly obligation. I did it because from the moment I saw you standing on this porch with your rifle, too proud to ask for help but desperately needing it, I felt drawn to you in a way I can't fully explain. Eliza's heart thundered in her chest. "Blake, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I understand that Thomas's memory is still strong as it should be. I just wanted you to know where I stand. Good night, Eliza." He released her hand and descended the steps, leaving Eliza standing in the moonlight, torn between the safety of her grief and the frightening possibility of opening her heart again. July brought sweltering heat and increased activity on the ranch. The garden flourished under Eliza's care, and Blake had helped rebuild the chicken coop, allowing her to expand her flock. Though her pride had initially resisted, she'd begun selling eggs and excess produce in town, providing a modest but steady income. Blake continued to visit regularly, though a new carefulness marked their interactions after the night of the social. He focused on teaching James ranch skills, showing the boy how to repair fencing and care for the horses with patient instruction. One particularly hot afternoon, as Blake and James worked on reinforcing the corral, Eliza brought them cold lemonade. She paused at a distance, watching the easy interaction between them, Blake demonstrating how to properly hammer a nail, James's face serious with concentration as he tried to mimic the technique. "Like this?" James asked, tongue caught between his teeth in focus. "Perfect," Blake praised. "Your father would be proud of how quickly you're learning." James beamed at the mention of Thomas. "Ma says I have his hands. You think that's why I can do this good?" "I think you have your mother's determination," Blake replied. "That's even more important than having the right hands." The simple wisdom of his response, and the natural way he included Thomas's memory without awkwardness, made something shift inside Eliza. Blake wasn't trying to replace Thomas in James's life. He was helping the boy connect to his father's memory while teaching him to move forward. That evening, after James was asleep, Eliza found Blake on the porch preparing to leave for town. "Would you stay a while?" she asked. "I'd like to talk." They sat side by side in the rocking chairs, the night filled with cricket song and distant coyote calls. "I need to ask you something," Eliza said finally, "and I need an honest answer." "Always," Blake promised. "Why Rock Springs? Of all the places you could have settled after years of wandering, why here?" Blake was quiet for so long that Eliza thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was contemplative. "I was passing through in April, on my way to California. Stopped for supplies, overheard someone at the saloon talking about the widow Morgan, too stubborn to ask for help even as her place fell apart around her." He glanced at her with a small smile. "Reminded me of myself after I lost Sarah. Thought maybe I could help, and in helping, find something I'd been missing." "And have you?" Eliza asked softly. "Found what you were missing?" Blake turned to face her fully. "I think I have, but I'm afraid of pushing too hard, asking for too much." The honesty in his gaze gave Eliza courage. "Thomas will always be part of me," she said. "He gave me James, this land, years of love, but I'm beginning to understand that honoring his memory doesn't mean I have to stay broken." "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Eliza Morgan," Blake said. "Broken isn't a word I'd ever used to describe you." "I felt broken," she confessed, "until you knocked on our door and started putting the pieces back together, not just the ranch, but me, us." Blake reached for her hand, his touch warm and sure. "I'd like to keep doing that if you'll let me." Instead of answering with words, Eliza leaned forward and gently pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Blake's hand came up to cradle her cheek. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've wanted to do that since the social," Blake admitted. "I've wanted you to," Eliza replied, surprising herself with her boldness. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, Blake's childhood in Ohio, Eliza's journey west with her parents as a young girl, their respective marriages and losses. With each revelation, the connection between them strengthened, building on the foundation of friendship that had developed over the past months. As summer progressed into fall, Blake became a fixture at the Morgan Ranch. He maintained his farrier business in town, but spent most evenings and his day off each week with Eliza and James. The three established comfortable routines: Sunday dinners after church, reading together in the evenings, Blake teaching James to fish in the nearby creek. The community took notice of the developing relationship, but the expected gossip never materialized. Instead, there was a collective sense of approval. The widow Morgan was smiling again, her son thriving, her ranch returning to productivity under the skilled guidance of the newcomer who'd chosen to make Rock Springs his home. In late September, as they harvested the last of the garden together, Blake broached a subject they'd been circling for weeks. "Winter will be here before we know it," he observed, helping Eliza dig potatoes. "The nights are already getting cold." She agreed, sensing there was more to his comment than weather observations. "I've been thinking," he continued, setting down his shovel. "It would make sense for me to be here more, consistently. The ride to town in the snow will become difficult. And there's always more work to be done around the place." Eliza straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "Are you proposing to move in, Mr. Rutherford?" she asked, her tone teasing despite the seriousness of the conversation. Blake's expression remained earnest. "I'm proposing marriage, Eliza. I love you. I love James. I want us to be a family officially, properly." Though she'd suspected this was coming, the reality of his proposal still took her breath away. Eliza looked around at the ranch that had once been her prison of grief and was now thriving again, just as she was. "James will be thrilled," she said softly. "And his mother?" Blake asked, moving closer to take her hands in his. Eliza smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "His mother is terrified and happier than she ever thought she could be again." Blake's answering smile was brilliant. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Eliza confirmed, laughing as Blake swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the middle of their potato patch. They were married on a crisp October day in the small church in Rock Springs, James proudly standing as Blake's best man. Sheriff Jenkins gave the bride away, and it seemed the entire town turned out to celebrate the union that many had watched develop with approval and even a touch of romanticism. "I told you she just needed time," Martha Jenkins was overheard telling her husband as they watched the newlyweds share their first dance at the reception held in the town hall. "That woman has more strength than most men I know." "And Rutherford had the patience to wait her out," the sheriff agreed. "Never seen a man work so hard to fix a place that wasn't even his." "It wasn't the place he was fixing," Martha corrected with a knowing smile. The first year of their marriage brought both joys and challenges. Blake officially moved his farrier business to the ranch, converting an old storage shed into a proper shop. His reputation for quality work ensured a steady stream of customers from Rock Springs and surrounding areas, while Eliza's expanding garden and poultry business contributed significantly to their income. James thrived with Blake's influence, growing more confident and skilled in ranch operations while maintaining his mother's love of books and learning. The three settled into family life with an ease that sometimes amazed Eliza, especially on evenings when she would find Blake helping James with schoolwork at the kitchen table, their heads bent together over a difficult math problem. In the spring of 1878, as the ranch bloomed with new life, Eliza shared news that brought tears to Blake's eyes. "A baby," he whispered, hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" "As certain as morning sickness and doctor." "Peterson's confirmation can make me." Eliza replied with a mixture of joy and trepidation. At 34, she was considered somewhat old for another child, but the doctor had assured her of her good health. Blake's response was to gather her in his arms with reverent care. "I never thought I'd have this chance again," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "A family, a child of my own." "Are you happy then?" Eliza asked, already knowing the answer from the wonder in his eyes. "Happier than I have any right to be," he assured her. James received the news of his impending sibling with excitement, immediately volunteering to teach the baby everything he knew about horses and fishing. At 10 years old, he was at an age where the idea of a younger sibling, particularly a brother, represented a potential playmate rather than competition. "What if it's a sister?" Blake teased him. James considered this possibility with serious deliberation. "That would be all right too," he decided magnanimously. "Girls can learn to fish. Ma can do it." "Indeed she can," Blake agreed with a wink at his wife. "Your mother can do just about anything she sets her mind to." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall, the baby growing strong as Eliza's body changed to accommodate the new life within. Blake was attentive to a fault, sometimes driving Eliza to exasperation with his insistence that she rest, or his taking over of chores she was perfectly capable of handling. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him one October afternoon as he tried to prevent her from helping with the apple harvest. "Humor me," Blake requested. "I missed this experience with Sarah. Our baby was born while I was away at war. By the time I returned, they were both gone. I just want to be part of every moment this time." The reminder of his past loss softened Eliza's frustration. "All right," she conceded, "but you have to promise not to hover quite so much once the baby arrives." Blake's smile was rueful. "I make no such promises." Their son, William Thomas Rutherford, was born on a snowy December night in 1878, arriving after a difficult but ultimately successful labor with the assistance of Martha Jenkins and the town doctor. Blake, who had paced the house for hours listening to his wife's labor, was overcome with emotion when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in his arms. "He has your chin," Eliza observed tiredly from the bed, her face pale but radiant with the joy of their new arrival. "And your determination," Blake replied, noting the vigor with which the tiny boy protested his entry into the world. "He'll be strong like his mother." James was permitted a brief visit to meet his new brother before being sent to stay with the Jenkins family while Eliza recovered. The boy approached the bed cautiously, eyes wide as he peered at the small bundle in his mother's arms. "He's so little," James whispered. "Was I that small?" "Even smaller," Eliza told him. "But you grew strong just as William will." "William Thomas," James repeated the baby's full name. "For Pa?" Eliza exchanged a glance with Blake, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, for your father," she confirmed. "And for Blake's father, William. Both good men who would have been proud to know you and your brother." James seemed satisfied with this, carefully touching the baby's tiny hand with a finger. "I'll help take care of him," he promised solemnly. "I can tell him about Pa so he knows." "That would be perfect," Blake said, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No one could do that better than you." Spring of 1879 found the Rutherford Morgan family thriving. The ranch, once on the verge of ruin, now supported not only the family but two hired hands who helped Blake with the expanding farrier business and cattle operation. The house itself had been enlarged with the addition of 2 rooms, a necessity with the growing family. One April evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, baby William sleeping contentedly in Eliza's arms while James practiced his roping skills on a wooden post in the yard, Blake turned to his wife with a contemplative expression. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? He asked. If I hadn't stopped in Rock Springs that day, if I'd continued on to California as planned. Eliza considered the question, looking out at the land that had seen both her deepest despair and greatest joy. I think about it sometimes, she admitted. I was so determined to manage alone to keep everyone at a distance. I might have succeeded in driving everyone away, eventually even James when he was old enough. You're too strong for that, Blake disagreed. You would have found your way. Perhaps, Eliza said, but it would have been a much lonelier path. When you knocked on our door that day, offering to mend things. She smiled, remembering her initial resistance. I thought you meant the roof, the fences. I didn't realize you were talking about hearts, mine and James's. Blake reached over to gently stroke William's downy head before taking Eliza's free hand in his. I knew from the moment I saw you that you weren't truly broken, just wounded and protecting yourself. All I wanted was the chance to show you that life could be good again. And now? Eliza asked, though she already knew the answer. Now, Blake said, bringing her hand to his lips, I want a lifetime of building something together, this ranch, our family, memories that honor the past while embracing the future. James called out from the yard, eager to show off a successful loop. Blake and Eliza both applauded his achievement, their faces illuminated by the golden light of the setting sun. Later that night, with both boys asleep and the house quiet around them, Eliza and Blake lay close in their bed, the intimacy of shared dreams and shared burdens binding them more strongly than passion alone ever could. I love you, Eliza whispered into the darkness. For your patience, your strength, but most of all for helping me remember how to live again. Blake's arms tightened around her. And I love you for letting me try, he replied, for opening your door that day, both the one to your home and the one to your heart. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered across the land that had witnessed their journey from strangers to family. Inside, wrapped in each other's embrace, they found the peace that comes from knowing that even the deepest wounds can heal when tended with care and love. By 1885, the Rutherford Ranch, as it had come to be known throughout the county, was among the most successful operations in the area. Blake's farrier skills had expanded into selective horse breeding, producing animals known for their strength and temperament. Eliza's initial small garden had grown into a productive farm operation, supplying vegetables to merchants as far away as Cheyenne. James, now 17, had developed into a thoughtful young man with his mother's determination, and a compassion learned from the man who had stepped into the role of father with such natural grace. William, at 7, was Blake's shadow, fascinated by everything to do with horses and metalwork. And 5-year-old Emma, born in the summer of 1880, had her father wrapped firmly around her finger, her auburn curls and curious nature a constant delight to the entire family. On the 20th anniversary of Thomas Morgan's death, a date Eliza still acknowledged quietly, she stood at the small family cemetery on the edge of their property, placing wildflowers on his grave. Blake joined her, respectful of the moment but offering his steady presence. He would be proud of James, Eliza said softly, of what the ranch has become. He would be proudest of you, Blake replied, of your resilience, your capacity to love again without diminishing what you shared with him. Eliza looked up at her husband, noting the silver now threading his dark hair, the deeper lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and the harsh Wyoming elements. 7 years of marriage had only strengthened the bond between them, each challenge faced together making them more certain of their choice in each other. I used to worry that loving you somehow dishonored his memory, she confessed. Now I understand that the heart's capacity for love isn't limited. It expands. Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sarah will always be part of who I am," he said. "Just as Thomas shaped you, but what we've built together isn't shadowed by the past, it's enriched by it." As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The broken widow and the wandering veteran, each carrying their own grief, had somehow found in each other not just comfort but true partnership and joy. The future stretched before them, filled with both challenges and promise. James's discussions about college in Denver, William's growing skills with horses, Emma's boundless curiosity about the world. The ranch itself continued to evolve, just as they had, adapting to changing times while maintaining its essential character. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table Blake had crafted with his own hands, Eliza looked at the faces of those she loved most in the world and felt a completeness that once would have seemed impossible. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led her here to a life rich with meaning, connection, and love. Later, as they prepared for bed, Blake caught Eliza looking at an old photograph of Thomas that she kept in her bedside drawer. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Letting me in when you were determined to manage alone." Eliza carefully returned the photograph to its place before turning to her husband. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "You didn't try to replace what I'd lost, Blake. You showed me that I could honor the past while still embracing the future. You mended what was broken without erasing the cracks. They are part of our story now." Blake drew her into his arms, his embrace as secure and comforting as it had been on that first tentative day when she'd finally allowed herself to accept his help. "Our story," he murmured against her hair. "I like the sound of that." Outside their window, the stars shone over Rock Springs and the land that had witnessed their journey from strangers to beloved partners. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, they found the peace that comes from knowing that even the deepest wounds can heal when tended with care, and that sometimes the most unexpected knock at the door can lead to the greatest happiness of all.